Well, I'm delighted to be joined again by Professor Robert Clancy from Australia. Professor Clancy holds the Order of Australia for services to medicine and immunology. He's an emeritus professor of pathology and still does some work as a consultant physician. So, Robert, thank you for coming back and welcome, of course.
My great pleasure, John.
So the way I see this, Robert, is whenever you give an mRNA vaccine, it's going to go into a cell, potentially the myocardium, for example, potentially the brain, potentially the testes, the ovaries, anywhere really. That cell, the genetic apparatus in that cell, is going to produce the antigen and express that antigen onto the cell surface. And then there's going to be an immune inflammatory response to that antigen on the cell surface. All you're doing is getting the body to make an antigen instead of giving an antigen, but you've got all these risks of systemic inflammation.
It becomes like an autoimmune disease. The body is firing itself off against those cells. This is crystal clear. This is not hocus pocus. This has been demonstrated. And I personally believe that this is underpinning the groundswell of concern that I notice even in the British press today. I think there was a cardiologist calling for a cessation of the genetic vaccines until we sort this out.
What we're actually saying is that with these mRNA vaccines, you can't control the dose. I find that terrifying.
You can't control where they are. You can't control where they go. You can't control how much of the antigen they make. And you can't control how long they do it for. So in a sense, it's all about you can't control. Once you put something into the body, you cross your fingers and hope it does the right thing. Now, with traditional vaccines, with 130, 40 years experience, and based on understanding the biology of the infection you're dealing with, we have a pretty good handle on this. These aren't vaccines we're talking about. They're basically gene products. It's genetic engineering. We're giving it against the background of knowing what the live non-attenuated virus would do. We don't have any of that information for the genetic vaccines. So the problems are several. The first is that you're creating, if you like, systemic autoimmune disease. And I don't think anybody who understands and is critical can deny that. Secondly, we're getting uncontrolled amounts of antigen.
But what you're saying is that could produce a completely different volume of antigen in me as compared to you.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it does. It almost certainly does, because it's regenerating. It's getting remade, and you're getting more and more of this. Once it's in the cell, it actually produces antigen much longer than I think the people who first developed these considered. You have no control over the amount of antigen that's being presented to the body's immune system. The immune response, and remember that's what we're looking for with a vaccine, to get a good immune response, depends on the amount of antigen. And that's been sorted out with the old vaccines because we work out how much antigen you need to put in, because it's not going to change. It's not going to go up or down, which it will with the genetic vaccines.
So you get an increased immune response as the dose of antigen increases. And then as the dose of antigen increases further, the immune response reduces. Am I right about that?
Absolutely. And the traditional term for this is you have in the middle, you've got a protective immunisation on both sides with low amounts of antigen, high amounts of antigen. We have non-responsiveness, and the term used is tolerance. We're tolerant. So we have low zone tolerance, high zone tolerance. And when we put in a messenger RNA and it's making who knows how much antigen over what period of time and where, you have no idea whether you're getting tolerance or immunity. And of course, this is exactly what we're finding in the people who are getting over booster after booster. It's no secret. They're actually turning off their immune response. We knew that from the British data over a year ago, 18 months ago.
So with an mRNA vaccine, if it turns out that I make a very small amount of antigen, I'm not going to get a very good immune response. Yeah, if we give the same dose of vaccine to me and you make a whacking amount of antigen, that's actually going to have an adverse effect on your personal immunity by starting to turn your immune system off.
Absolutely, certainly could.
The British government are still claiming that people that are getting the boosters are protected against hospitalisation. That's what their data seems to be showing. But what we're saying,
I think it's fair for them to say that. The data I've seen, and the British data, is that if you give, say, people have had their standard 2 vaccines, they have a booster, they'll have about a 30 or 40% less chance of going to hospital for a couple of months. And this period of relative protection is getting less and less and less as you keep giving more and more vaccines. So we're actually getting over-immunised people, and they're getting more infections and more severe infections. And this is not a secret. This is not my view. This is what the data, the official data, is telling us. But no one wants to know it. Now we're finding that the recent data in my own state of New South Wales, that everybody in hospital were multiply immunised. None of the unimmunised people were getting sick enough to get into hospital. That's just an overview, but we're seeing that repeated in your country, mine, America, all over the world. The other issue with the messenger RNA vaccines that no one wants to even think about is that we have what's called a reverse transcriptase. Now, that's an enzyme that exists in our cells that can take the messenger RNA and convert it back into DNA. And what we have no idea about, we know that can happen, it's been demonstrated, is the implications of that in the individual by changing the DNA. Are you producing a potential cancer risk? Or if it gets into the germline, are you producing a risk for transgenerational expression?
To intervene in the life of someone who's currently healthy, you know, you have to be quite audacious really to intervene in that situation. It's a different situation.
Who has their reproductive years ahead of them as well.
Indeed.
I think that's that's the scariest thing, and nobody can turn around and say that that's not a potential risk. Mm-hmm. I passed some of this information to a friend of mine who is one of the world's leading epidemiologists the other day, and he was completely oblivious of it because he's not an immunologist, and he said, geez, that's scary. That's really scary. And I think we have to get this message to people. The governments have to be advised by people who understand and are not conflicted. I've been dealing with immunologists in big pharma companies all my working life. And I probably shouldn't say this, but their focus is basically keeping their job. They have a role to focus on a particular tiny thing. Anything outside of that area is something they don't take into account. And I won't go into specifics, but it has blown me away, the lack of broad-based thinking that occurs. The total focus is producing a commercial product. My job in Australia for many years was the go-to person in advising on vaccines, which I did wholeheartedly. I'm a great vaccine supporter, and it breaks my heart to see that I'm having to say these sorts of things. Just in Australia, we've found batches are getting through great variations, very poor quality control. They haven't even developed the experience of knowing what quality control processes they should be using. People who have no understanding of these issues are advising government, oh, look, give us lots of money. We only want $1 billion. We'll produce all these messenger RNA vaccines for you. It is crazy.
So, message to the Australian, British and Canadian governments, really. Check out your science before you invest your billions of dollars in an untested new biological technology.
Do not hear it. I don't know. It's going to take an explosive events to bring them to heel. It's so scary, isn't it? I actually feel sorry for a lot of the politicians because they're listening to advice. But remember, they're listening to people who want to get the $100 million to develop, have the thing going in their particular building, in their backyard, and their university. It seriously is a very corrupted system. People involved who are making decisions haven't got a clue about basic immunology.